My name is Evelyn, I'm 65. And my son told me to sleep in the barn of my own home so his wife's 10 relatives could have my bed. Before I tell you how I turned their luxury vacation into a living nightmare that had them begging for mercy, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The champagne flute felt cool and steady in my hand, a stark contrast to the chaotic scene playing out on my tablet screen. I was sitting in a plush armchair in a luxury hotel suite in Bozeman, watching my son Kevin scream. His face, usually so composed and corporate, was a mask of pure panic. Behind him, my prized horse Maverick had just sent a priceless antique vase crashing to the floor of my living room. I could hear the shrill, unending shriek of his wife, Tiffany, echoing from somewhere off-screen. My best friend Carol, sitting across from me, let out a delighted snort and refilled my glass. I smiled. It was a cold, satisfied smile. It all started 3 days ago, with a phone call that shattered the peace I had worked my entire life to build. You see, after 30 years as a nurse in the heart of Chicago, I retired. My late husband, Richard, and I had poured every spare dollar and every dream into this 100-acre ranch in Montana. It was our sanctuary. Richard passed 2 years ago, right after we finally finished the main house. His battle with cancer was long, and he never got to truly enjoy our dream, but he made me promise I'd live it for the both of us. And I did. My days were simple: waking with the sun, tending to my horses and chickens, working in the garden he'd designed for me. It was a quiet life, a healing life. Until the phone rang that Tuesday. It was Kevin. His voice was slick with a kind of forced cheerfulness he always used when he wanted something. "Mom, great news," he chirped. My heart gave a little flutter of hope. I hadn't seen him since Richard's funeral, where he'd spent most of the reception on his phone finalizing some business deal. "Kevin, honey, it's so good to hear your voice. Is everything okay?" "Better than okay. Tiffany and I are coming to visit this weekend. We'll be there Friday night." For a moment I was genuinely thrilled. "That's wonderful. I'll get the guest room ready. I can make your favorite pot roast." He cut me off with a sharp laugh. "Actually, Mom, it's not just us. We're bringing Tiffany's parents, and her 2 sisters and their husbands. Oh, and the cousins from California. 10 of them plus us." The air went out of my lungs. My kitchen, usually so warm and welcoming, suddenly felt cold. 10 people, Kevin? I don't know if I can get everything ready on such short notice. The other bedrooms are mostly for storage. His tone shifted. It was the condescending voice he used when he was talking to one of his junior employees, not his mother. "Mom, what's the big deal? What else do you have to do out there besides feed chickens? Look, we're going to need the best rooms. Obviously, Tiffany's parents will take your master bedroom." It felt like a punch to the gut. My room? Kevin, where am I supposed to sleep? The couch in the living room is fine, isn't it? It's just for a weekend. He then delivered the blow that made my blood run cold, the one that ignited the fire. Dad would have loved to see the family all together at the ranch. That's why he bought the place, right? For the family. For his legacy. The manipulation was so blatant, so disrespectful to his father's memory. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. "Your father would never, ever kick me out of my own bed, Kevin. It's already decided," he said, his voice hard as ice. Tiffany already posted all about her family's authentic ranch getaway on Instagram. It's getting a ton of likes. Frankly, if you can't handle it, maybe it's time to consider that this is too much for you. A woman your age alone, it's not practical. You should think about selling. It's a valuable piece of your inheritance after all. Before I could even process the word inheritance, he delivered the final, cruelest strike. "Look, if you don't like it, you can just sleep in the barn. You seem to care more about those horses than anything else anyway." The line went dead. He had hung up on me. I stood there, phone in my hand, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The pain was sharp, a physical ache in my chest. He didn't just insult me. He'd spat on everything Richard and I had built. He saw our dream not as a home, but as a commodity, an asset to be leveraged for his own social climbing. And me? I was just an obstacle. An old woman to be moved aside. I stared out the kitchen window, my eyes landing on Maverick as he galloped across the pasture, his coat shining in the afternoon sun. He was a force of nature, powerful, intelligent, and fiercely protective. And in that moment, watching him, the grief and shock inside me began to curdle, hardening into something else. Something cold and sharp and utterly resolved. A slow smile spread across my face. A smile that didn't touch my eyes. Kevin wanted an authentic ranch experience for his entitled guests. Oh, I was going to give him one. He just had no idea that the authenticity he was about to experience was a very special kind I was designing just for him. He thought he was coming for a vacation. He was walking into hell. And I was going to be the one holding the matches. The first call I made wasn't to a lawyer. It was to Hank. Hank and Dale had been working this ranch for 15 years. They'd helped Richard build the damn fences, and they'd stood by his grave with me, their hats in their hands, tears streaming down their weathered faces. They weren't just employees, they were family. I didn't even have to finish the story. When I told Hank that Kevin had told me to sleep in the barn, there was a dead silence on the line. Then I heard him spit on the ground. "That boy ain't Richard's son," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Not in the ways that count. What do you need, Evelyn?" When I laid out the first whispers of my plan, I heard Dale let out a whoop of laughter in the background. "It'll be our absolute pleasure," Hank said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. "We'll get the supplies." My second call was to Carol, my best friend of 40 years, my rock since Richard got sick. She listened to the whole sordid tale without interrupting. When I was done, she said just two things. First, "I hope you told him where he could shove that couch." Second, "Pack a bag, Evelyn. The finest spa in Bozeman has a grieving widow's discount this weekend. Or at least it will when I get done talking to them. We are going to watch this dumpster fire from a suite with room service and an endless supply of wine." As I started packing a small overnight bag, my mind drifted to a video call I'd had with Kevin just last week. The Montana spring was finally in full bloom, and I'd excitedly shown him the small memorial garden I was planting for Richard near the creek, filled with his favorite wildflowers. Kevin had looked at the screen, his expression bored. "That's nice, Mom," he'd said, tapping on his keyboard. "But you know, that patch of land gets great sun. You could probably grow some high-yield alfalfa there. It's a much more practical use of the space." Practical. He wanted me to plow over my tribute to his father for alfalfa. The memory was like gasoline on a flame. All my hesitation vanished. This wasn't just about a rude comment or an inconvenient weekend. This was about defending my husband's legacy from our own son, who saw it only as a line item on a balance sheet. He was trying to erase Richard to monetize our love story. A cold fury settled deep in my bones. The next day was a blur of meticulous preparation. The first thing I did was place an order on Amazon for a set of small motion-activated security cameras. Same-day delivery to a drop-off point in town. They were tiny, easily hidden, and would be my eyes and ears. Carol, ever the brilliant accomplice, suggested I get the ones with audio recording. "You'll want to hear them scream," she'd said cheerfully. Hank and Dale got to work on the more agricultural aspects of the plan. They understood a ranch's delicate ecosystem better than anyone. They knew which pipes were prone to clogging if a certain amount of hay was introduced. They knew how to adjust the gate on the pig pen just so, making an escape look like an accident. They were artists and their medium was chaos. I spent the afternoon online, not looking at resort packages but researching. I studied my son's and my daughter-in-law's social media. Tiffany's Instagram was a monument to vanity. Endless photos of expensive meals, designer clothes, and exotic vacations. All with hashtags like #blessed and #living my best life. Kevin's LinkedIn was a shrine to his corporate ambition, filled with jargon about synergizing market verticals and optimizing brand outreach. They weren't people, they were brands. And their brand was about to take a serious hit. That evening, as I placed the last tiny camera on a bookshelf, disguised between a collection of Richard's old Western novels, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt since the phone call. I wasn't just a sad old widow anymore. I was a general preparing for battle. I was defending my home, my husband's memory, my own dignity. I looked at a photo of Richard on the mantelpiece, his arm around me, both of us covered in dirt and smiling. "He needs to learn, honey," I whispered to the picture. "He needs to learn that some things aren't for sale." The plan was set. The players were in position. And I knew with every fiber of my being that this was more than just revenge. It was a lesson. A lesson in respect taught with hay, horse manure, and a whole lot of creative engineering. The storm was coming to my quiet little ranch in Montana, and I was the one who was going to make it rain. Friday morning arrived, crisp and clear. The calm before the storm. After Hank and Dale left for their family emergency in Wyoming, a trip that would conveniently end just a few miles down the road at a fishing cabin, I began the final intimate touches of my masterpiece of mayhem. First, the house's interior. I went into the linen closet and stripped out every sheet of high-thread count Egyptian cotton, every plush, absorbent towel. I folded them neatly and stored them in the locked cellar. In their place, I laid out the old, scratchy army surplus blankets we kept for emergencies. For towels, I unearthed a stack of thin, non-absorbent camping towels that felt more like sandpaper than cotton. They were technically clean, but they had that permanent musty smell that only years of being packed away can create. Next, I addressed the climate. The thermostat in the guest wing was a newer digital model, a small concession Richard had made to modernity. I programmed it to run a diabolical cycle. From 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., the temperature would plummet to a brisk 50 degrees. Then, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., it would soar to a sweltering 85. I just feign ignorance. Oh, that old thing? It's been on the fritz for ages. Ranch houses, you know. The pool was my canvas. Richard had been so proud of it, crystal clear and cool. It took me an hour, but I transformed it. I dumped in 3 large buckets of algae I'd been carefully cultivating from the horse trough. I added a bag of mud for color and authenticity. The final touch was a dozen tadpoles from the local pet supply store, released to enjoy their new murky kingdom. It looked less like a swimming pool and more like the primordial soup. Then came the centerpiece of the operation. The horses. This part had to be perfect. Maverick, my lead gelding, was brilliant. Too smart for his own good sometimes. He'd learned how to nudge open the simple slide bolt on his stall if he was sufficiently motivated. My motivation for him was a large bucket of sweet oats, molasses, and chopped apples, which I placed right in the center of my kitchen island. The scent was intoxicating. Before leaving, I went to his stall. I didn't unlatch it completely. No, that would be too obvious. I just slid the bolt back until it was barely, precariously holding on. A good solid nudge would be all it took. As I packed my car, placing the tablet that would be my window to the chaos on the passenger seat, I had a brief, fleeting moment of doubt. A pang of motherly guilt. Was this too much? Was this cruel? I sank into the driver's seat, the keys feeling heavy in my hand. And then, as clear as if he were standing next to me, I heard Kevin's voice in my head, dripping with contempt. If you don't like it, you can just sleep in the barn. The guilt evaporated like mist in the Montana sun, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I wasn't being cruel. I was delivering consequences. I was administering a dose of reality so potent it would strip the veneer of entitlement right off their designer clothes. They wanted an authentic ranch experience. They were about to get a lifetime's worth in one weekend. I started the car and pulled down the long gravel driveway. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I glanced at the tablet screen. The live feed from the kitchen camera showed the bucket of oats, glistening under the lights. From another camera facing the stables, I could see Maverick, head up, nostrils flaring. He could smell it. He was already testing the bolt on his stall door with his nose. Nudge. Nudge. A slow grin spread across my face. I turned onto the main road, heading for the highway for Bozeman, for Carol and my front row seat. The first domino was already teetering. The show was about to begin, and I had a feeling it was going to be better than I could have ever imagined. The curtain was rising on Kevin's authentic ranch nightmare. The hotel suite was glorious. It was all floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the mountains, a fireplace, and a bathroom bigger than my first apartment in Chicago. Carol had already ordered champagne and a massive charcuterie board. We clinked our glasses together. To mothers who've had enough, she said with a wicked grin. And to the sons who are about to find out, I replied, settling into a comfortable chair with the tablet propped up on the coffee table. Right on schedule at 7 p.m. The camera's eye placed at the end of the driveway lit up. A parade of pristine, city-clean SUVs crunched up the gravel road. A gleaming black Escalade, a white Range Rover, and a silver Mercedes. It looked like a car commercial for people who have never seen a dirt road in their lives. I watched as the doors opened and the guests spilled out. Tiffany emerged from the Range Rover like she was stepping onto a red carpet, wearing a white linen jumpsuit and what looked to be 4-inch stiletto heels. Louboutins in my gravel driveway. I almost choked on my champagne. "Oh, you sweet, stupid child," I murmured at the screen. The rest of the family was a sea of pastel cashmere and brand new designer jeans that had clearly never been near an actual cow. Tiffany's parents, Diane and Tom, looked around with expressions of faint disgust, as if the fresh mountain air was personally offending them. Kevin, trying to look like the lord of the manor, fumbled with the key I'd told him was under the ceramic frog next to the door. He finally got it open, swinging the door wide with a proud flourish. "Welcome to the ranch," he announced. The reaction was instantaneous and magnificent. First came the smell. Even through the tablet speakers, I could almost feel the thick, earthy wave of horse manure that hit them. Then came the scream. It wasn't a small yelp. It was a full-throated horror movie shriek from Tiffany. Maverick, my majestic, intelligent boy, had not only gotten into the house but had made himself completely at home. He was standing right in the middle of the foyer, and as if on cue, he lifted his tail and deposited a large steaming pile of manure directly onto my prized Navajo rug. It was a masterpiece of comedic timing. The chaos erupted. People were yelling, stumbling backward, tripping over their own expensive luggage. Starlight, my gentle mare, had found Tiffany's fallen Gucci handbag and was methodically chewing on the leather strap. From the kitchen I heard a crash as Duke, my youngest horse, knocked over the entire spice rack in his quest for the oat bucket. Turmeric and paprika rained down like confetti on my clean floors. "What the hell is this?" Kevin roared, his professional composure shattering into a million pieces. His phone rang almost immediately. It was my burner phone, the one I'd bought specifically for this occasion. I let it ring 3 times for dramatic effect before answering, putting a deliberate, frail quiver in my voice. "Hello, dear. Did you get there all right?" He screamed into the phone, the audio peaking on my tablet. "There are horses in the house." I feigned a dramatic gasp, clutching my chest as if I might faint. Carol had to stuff a napkin in her mouth to keep from howling with laughter. "What? Oh my heavens, that's impossible. They must have gotten out of the pasture. Oh dear Lord. And Hank and Dale are on their family trip in Wyoming this weekend. I'm so sorry, honey, but you'll have to get them out yourselves." "How?" he shrieked. "They're destroying everything. They're animals. Just lead them out, sweetie." I cooed, my voice dripping with fake concern. "There are halters in the barn. They're as gentle as kittens. I'm so sorry, but I'm in Bozeman for a doctor's appointment. My arthritis, you know. It's been acting up something fierce. I won't be back until Sunday night." "Sunday? Mom, you can't." "Oh, the doctor is calling me in now, dear. I have to go. Love you." I hung up and immediately turned the phone off. I looked at Carol, whose eyes were streaming with tears of laughter. We raised our champagne flutes in a silent, triumphant toast. On the screen, the chaos was escalating beautifully. The City Folk vs. Country Beasts reality show had officially begun, and we had the best seats in the house. The night was young, and their authentic ranch experience had only just begun to unfold. The next 3 hours were better than anything on Netflix. We watched, utterly captivated, as 10 entitled city dwellers and 1 traitorous son tried to reason with 3 very large, very uncooperative horses. Tiffany's brother-in-law, a slick-looking guy in an Armani shirt, decided he was some kind of horse whisperer. He strode confidently up to Maverick, grabbing his mane to try and lead him out. Maverick, who dislikes being touched by strangers, promptly turned his head and sneezed directly into the man's face. A fine spray of horse snot and hay dust coated his perfectly styled hair and $1,000 shirt. His scream of disgust was music to my ears. Another one of them, one of the cousins, tried to shoo Starlight out with a broom. Starlight, thinking it was a new game, began playfully chasing him around the living room coffee table. The man, whose name I think was Chad, ended up scrambling onto the sofa, shrieking like a toddler while the horse nudged him with her nose. The climax of the horse wrangling fiasco came when they finally managed to corner Duke near the back patio. They got him outside, but he was on the raised wooden deck. They couldn't figure out how to get him down the 3 steps to the lawn. He just stood there, contentedly ripping the cushions off my expensive patio furniture with his teeth. Meanwhile, the human drama was just as entertaining. Tiffany had locked herself in the downstairs bathroom, and we could hear her dramatic sobs through the door. Kevin was pounding on it, begging her to come out and help. Her mother, Diane, was pacing in the entryway, barking into her phone, presumably trying to find a hotel. "Good luck with that," I said to the screen. I knew for a fact there was a massive rodeo in the next county over this weekend. Every decent hotel within a 2-hour drive would be booked solid. Eventually, as the sun began to set, they gave up on the horses, who were now happily munching on the decorative shrubs by the patio. The group trudged back inside to assess the damage and figure out dinner. The gourmet cheese board, organic vegetables, and artisanal bread they had brought were gone. Maverick had made short work of the cheese, and the rest was either trampled or eaten. Kevin finally found the emergency supply pantry. I watched his face fall as he pulled out the contents. Canned beans, instant oatmeal, and powdered milk. It was the same food that had kept Richard and me alive for a week when a blizzard snowed us in years ago. To this crowd it was prison food. That was when I heard Diane's voice, sharp and clear, picked up by the camera in the kitchen. "I cannot believe your mother lives like this," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's no wonder Richard passed away. He probably wanted to escape this hellhole." Carol's hand shot out and squeezed mine. She knew. She knew how much Richard had loved this place, how he'd spent his last good months sketching plans for the garden from his chemo chair. He hadn't wanted to escape, he'd wanted to stay forever. The venom in that woman's voice burned away the last shred of my guilt. "That vile woman," Carol hissed. "Do you want me to call her caterer? I can get her blacklisted from every event in California." I actually laughed. A real deep laugh. "No, dear," I said, taking a sip of my champagne. "The horses are handling it beautifully." As if on cue, Duke reappeared in the kitchen doorway, lifted his tail, and deposited his opinion of Diane's comment right behind her pristine white sneakers. When she took a step backward, the wet squishing sound was perfectly audible. The screaming started all over again. By 9 p.m., they had retreated to their assigned rooms. The camera showed them huddled under the scratchy army blankets, still in their day clothes because their luggage was either damaged or still in the cars, and they were too scared of the dark to go get it. The thermostat had kicked in, and the temperature in the guest wing was steadily dropping. Soon they were shivering, complaining about the cold and the fact that the blankets smelled like a wet dog. They were, in fact, dog blankets I'd picked up from an animal shelter donation bin. I had washed them, of course. Mostly. The show was everything I'd hoped for and more. And the best part? The real performance hadn't even started yet. I smiled, thinking of the special alarm I had set. A 4:30 a.m. wake-up call, courtesy of a military-grade sound system and a very, very angry rooster. At precisely 4:30 a.m., the Rooster Symphony began. It wasn't just a rooster crow. It was a digital recording I'd created. A cacophony of a dozen different roosters, layered and amplified through the military-grade speakers Hank had installed in the attic. The sound wasn't just loud, it was visceral. It shook the entire house. On the tablet, I watched in glee as Kevin leaped out of bed, tangled in his scratchy blanket, his hair standing on end. "What in God's name is that?" Tiffany shrieked from under a pillow. In our luxurious soundproof hotel room, Carol and I were already on our second pot of coffee, a platter of fresh fruit arranged between us like we were watching the Super Bowl. "Is that the actual volume?" Carol asked, wincing as a new, particularly aggressive crowing sound joined the chorus. "Oh no," I said sweetly, adjusting my reading glasses. I turned it up a bit. "You know, my hearing isn't what it used to be." The system was designed for psychological warfare. It was programmed to continue for exactly 37 minutes, with random intervals of silence just long enough to give them a sliver of hope before shattering it with another earth-shattering crow. By 5 a.m., an exhausted zombie-like procession stumbled into the kitchen. But their ordeal was just beginning. The automatic feeders for the chickens, pigs, and horses had, of course, mysteriously failed to dispense the morning rations. I had disabled them remotely from my phone an hour earlier. This meant that my entire menagerie, 12 hens, 3 very curious pigs from the Johnsons' farm next door who'd found their way through the weakened fence, and my 3 horses, were all gathered around the house, loudly voicing their displeasure. The chickens were the most vocal. especially my prize-winning rooster, a belligerent creature Richard had named General Tso. He was a feathered Napoleon with a temper to match. "We're not farmers," one of Tiffany's sisters wailed. Her mascara from the day before streaked down her cheeks. "Just ignore them," Tiffany commanded, trying to salvage some shred of authority. "We'll drive into town for breakfast." A quick check of the GPS on Kevin's phone informed them that town was a 40-minute drive one way. Their attempt to make coffee was a pathetic sight. They found the instant decaf I'd left out, but they couldn't get the old percolator I'd swapped for my espresso machine to work. As they struggled, the animals grew bolder. Maverick discovered he could bang his hoof against the wooden porch, creating a rhythmic booming that echoed through the house. The pigs were enthusiastically redesigning the patio furniture. But the star of the morning was General Tso. He discovered he could fly just high enough to land on the kitchen windowsill. The face-to-face encounter between Tiffany and the rooster through the glass was cinematic. She screamed. He crowed back, pecking furiously at the window. "We have to feed them to make them stop," Kevin finally admitted, looking utterly defeated. And it wasn't even 6 a.m. yet. The men ventured outside as if they were entering a war zone. One immediately stepped in a fresh pile of manure. Another shrieked when a field mouse darted out of the feed shed. But the highlight was when Chad, the broom-wielding hero from the night before, approached the chicken coop with a bucket of feed. General Tso, defender of his realm, launched himself at the poor man like a feathered missile. The bucket went flying, scattering feed everywhere, and suddenly it was a free-for-all. Chickens swarmed, pigs charged from the patio, and the horses trotted over to investigate the commotion. Inside, the women weren't faring any better. The kitchen sink had developed a mysterious leak, courtesy of a loosened pipe fitting by Dale. They managed to make some burnt instant oatmeal and scrambled the blue Araucana eggs, which Diane refused to touch, convinced they were toxic. Tiffany announced she needed a long hot shower. "Oh, you sweet naive girl. I had adjusted the water heater's mixing valve." The shower had 2 settings: Arctic blast or surface of the sun. Her screams as the ice-cold water hit, followed by a new shriek an octave higher when the scalding water kicked in, were audible even over the chaos outside. After the disastrous breakfast and the shower ordeals, a fragile, exhausted quiet fell over the house. They were running on fumes, their city-honed arrogance completely eroded, replaced by a dull, shell-shocked resignation. It was the perfect time for them to discover the next phase of their education. It was Tiffany's sister, the one with the ruined mascara, who found it. "Hey, what's this?" she asked, her voice flat. She was pointing to a laminated sheet of paper I had tacked to the bulletin board in the laundry room, a place I knew they'd eventually have to go to find more of the sandpaper towels. I watched on the tablet as they all gathered around. It was a chore chart, titled in a careful strong script I had painstakingly copied from Richard's old journals, "Daily Ranch Responsibilities." It looked official, weathered, as if it had been there for years. The list was comprehensive. 8 a.m. Muck out stables. 8:30 a.m. Collect eggs, wear protection. 9 a.m. Check fence lines, west pasture. 10 a.m. Move irrigation pipes. 12 p.m. Clean pool filters and skim surface. "Clean the pool?" one of the cousins said, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Maybe it's not as bad as it looked last night." Sweet simple boy. In the harsh light of day, the pool was even more gruesome. The algae had bloomed, turning the water into a thick green carpet. The frogs had invited friends. "We are not doing this," Diane declared, her voice trembling with rage. While the family descended into another round of bickering, I saw Kevin slip away. He looked haunted. He walked slowly up the stairs and into my bedroom, his parents' bedroom. He wasn't looking for a weapon or a solution. He looked like a man searching for a ghost. He ran a hand over the patchwork quilt my grandmother had made, the one I kept on my bed. He picked up a silver-framed photo of Richard and me on our wedding day. And then he saw it. Propped against my pillow was a simple, white envelope with his name on it, written in my hand. I held my breath, leaning closer to the tablet. This was it. This was the moment that mattered more than all the manure and mayhem. This was the heart of the lesson. He sat on the edge of the bed and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of my best stationery. I had written only a few lines. Kevin, it read. By the time you read this, you will have experienced less than 1% of what it truly takes to run this ranch. Your father did this every single day for the last years of his life, even on the days he could barely stand up from the chemo because he loved this place. It wasn't just my dream, it was ours. If you can't respect that, if you can't respect me, then you don't belong here. The horses know it, the chickens know it, and I think deep down you know it too. Below the words, I had placed the last photo ever taken of Richard. He was on horseback, wearing his worn-out cowboy hat, grinning a wide, joyful grin despite the pain I knew he was in. In the background I was mucking out a stall, laughing at something he just said. We were home. We were happy. Through the tiny hidden camera, I saw my son's shoulders begin to shake. He lowered his head, the letter trembling in his hands. He was crying. Real silent, gut-wrenching sobs. For the first time since he was a little boy, I saw my son, not the corporate shark, not the entitled man, but the boy who had lost his father. I felt a pang in my own chest, a mix of triumph and profound sorrow. The lesson was starting to sink in. And then, shattering the sacred silence, came Tiffany's shrill voice from the bottom of the stairs. Kevin, are you just hiding up there? The toilet in the main bathroom is making a weird gurgling noise and it won't stop. I watched as the spell broke. He hastily folded the letter, his face hardening again, and shoved it into his pocket. The moment of connection, of potential redemption, was gone, flushed away by the demands of his entitled wife and a mysteriously malfunctioning toilet I'd asked Dale to tamper with. He stood up, squared his shoulders, and went back downstairs to play the part of the beleaguered host. The seed had been planted, but I knew it would take more than one letter to break through years of hardened selfishness. After the emotional roller coaster of the letter, the rest of Saturday was a slow, grinding descent into misery for my unwanted guests. The chore chart was ignored, but the consequences of a non-functioning ranch were not. The sink remained clogged, the rooms were either freezing or boiling, and the general atmosphere was one of simmering resentment. Then in the late afternoon, the sky turned a bruised, ugly purple. A real Montana thunderstorm rolled in over the mountains. It wasn't a gentle rain. It was a violent assault. The wind howled like a banshee, and rain came down in horizontal sheets, hammering against the windows. And that's when they discovered my next little surprise. The beautiful, large windows in the guest bedrooms were original to the house. They had old wooden frames that I'd been meaning to seal, but I'd conveniently forgotten to. As the rain intensified, water began to seep, then trickle, then stream in around the edges of the panes. Panic erupted. They ran for the sandpaper-like towels, which were useless. They used the scratchy blankets. They even started using their own expensive clothes to try and dam the incoming flood. It was a losing battle. But the real masterstroke was the upstairs bathroom window. I'd asked Hank to loosen the latch just enough so that a strong gust of wind would pop it open. And it did. The window flew open with a bang, and the storm roared into the house. Tiffany's sister's husband, the one with the snot on his Armani shirt, tried to force it shut, but the rain had already swollen the old wood. It was stuck wide open. In the middle of this chaos, with a brilliant flash of lightning that lit up the entire valley, the power went out. The house was plunged into a dark, roaring, wet nightmare. I watched on my tablet, which was still running on its own battery, as they stumbled around in the gloom screaming each other's names. Of course, my backup generator, which should have kicked on automatically, remained silent. I had asked Dale to drain the gas tank that morning. A simple but effective touch. The storm passed as quickly as it came, leaving behind a soggy, dripping, and powerless house. As night fell, so did a profound sense of despair. They were trapped. And that's when the new guests arrived. I hadn't planned this part, but I knew it was a possibility. With the power out and the house quiet, the local wildlife got bold. A family of raccoons, who I knew had a den near the creek, were drawn by the scent of the spilled groceries and the overturned trash cans. They were clever, determined creatures. They found the loose vent cover on the pantry's exterior wall, another little detail Dale had attended to, and squeezed their way inside. The first indication my guests had that they were no longer alone was a series of loud crashes from the pantry. Then came the chittering, scratching sounds. What was that? Tiffany whispered in the darkness. It's probably just a mouse. Kevin said, trying to sound brave. But the noises grew louder, more frantic. It sounded like a small army was dismantling the kitchen from the inside out. They huddled together in the living room, armed with flashlights from their phones, too terrified to investigate. They were city people, accustomed to sirens and traffic, not the unseen, unnerving sounds of nature invading their space. They were cold, wet, hungry, and now they were scared. They were completely at the mercy of the world they had so arrogantly invaded. They had wanted an authentic experience. Now they were living it. No power, no comfort, no escape, and strange creatures scratching in the walls. I took another sip of wine in my warm, dry, well-lit hotel room. The night was far from over, and I knew that tomorrow, when the Johnsons arrived for their barbecue, the psychological torment would reach a whole new level. Sunday morning dawned bright and mercilessly clear. The power was still out. The house was a disaster zone of damp clothes, muddy floors, and the lingering smell of wet raccoon. My guests looked like haggard survivors of a shipwreck. They were running on empty, their spirits completely broken. They didn't know it yet, but their final trial was about to pull up the driveway. At precisely 11 a.m., I heard it through the tablet's microphone, the rumble of diesel engines and the faint sound of Garth Brooks blasting from truck speakers. The Johnsons had arrived. Bill Johnson was my neighbor from the next ridge over. He was a wonderful man, as big as a bear with a heart to match, and a laugh that could shake shingles off a roof. He and his family were the epitome of Montana hospitality. Loud, generous, and utterly unstoppable. And they believed they were coming to a welcome barbecue for my son's family, a party I had forgotten to tell Kevin I had canceled. 3 dusty pickup trucks rolled into the yard, and a dozen Johnsons poured out, carrying coolers of beer, platters of potato salad, and to my everlasting joy, a portable mechanical bull that they set up right in the middle of my front lawn. Bill Johnson spotted Kevin on the porch and enveloped him in a bone-crushing hug. "You must be Evelyn's boy," he boomed. "She told us all about you. Said you were dying to get a real taste of the cowboy life." The look on Kevin's face was a priceless mixture of horror and confusion. Before he could protest, he was being introduced to Bill's wife, Martha, their 4 grown sons, and a swarm of grandchildren. What followed was 3 hours of the most exquisite social torture I could have possibly imagined. The Johnsons, in their boundless friendliness, simply could not comprehend that anyone wouldn't be thrilled by their presence. They presumed Kevin's family was just shy. They dragged Tiffany over to inspect Martha's prize-winning sourdough starter. They insisted Tom, Tiffany's father, show them his city grip on a branding iron. Diane was cornered by Aunt Carolyn, who spent 45 minutes giving her unsolicited advice on the best way to pluck a chicken. Then came the mechanical bull. Bill insisted that the menfolk prove their mettle. Tiffany's brother-in-law, Mr. Armani, was the first volunteer, clearly trying to reclaim some shred of his masculinity. He lasted approximately 4 seconds before being unceremoniously launched into a large muddy puddle left over from the storm. The Johnsons roared with laughter and applause, slapping him on the back as he dripped with mud and humiliation. The karaoke machine was next. Every single one of my guests was forced to sing. I watched, weeping with silent laughter, as Tiffany's sister delivered a dead-eyed, monotone rendition of Jolene. But the absolute peak was when Kevin himself was handed the microphone. The song choice, courtesy of one of the Johnson boys, was Friends in Low Places. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He sang it, his voice cracking, while staring at the wreckage of his weekend. The breaking point finally came when Bill Johnson, beer in hand, draped a heavy arm over Kevin's shoulders. "So," he said jovially, "your mom tells me you're a big shot marketing fella. Got any ideas on how we can improve the brand identity of our prize-winning bull semen? We're trying to break into the international market." I saw something in Kevin's snap. The exhaustion, the humiliation, the sheer absurdity of it all finally broke through his corporate armor. He just stared at Bill, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. As the sun began to dip low, the Johnsons finally packed up, leaving behind the mechanical bull, "You folks need the practice," and a mountain of empty beer cans. My guests sat in stunned silence on the porch steps, covered in dirt, sweat, and the lingering scent of barbecue smoke. They looked utterly defeated. It was in that moment of pure, unadulterated surrender that I finally heard the words I had been waiting all weekend to hear. The silence that followed the Johnsons' departure was heavy and absolute. It was the silence of total defeat. They sat scattered on the porch steps, staring into the twilight, too exhausted to even speak. The only sound was the chirping of crickets and the quiet hum of the mechanical bull, which the Johnsons had apparently left plugged into their own generator. Then Kevin spoke. His voice was quiet, raspy, and stripped of all its usual arrogance. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left. "I have to tell you guys something," he began, not looking at anyone. He stared at his hands, which were trembling slightly. Tiffany looked over at him, her expression wary. "I'm in trouble," he said. "Bad trouble. A business deal went south. I lost a lot of money. More than I can afford." He took a shaky breath. "I was counting on. I was planning to convince Mom to sell this place. I told her it was for her own good, that it was too much for her. But that was a lie." Tiffany gasped. "Kevin, what are you talking about?" "There's a developer," he went on, the words tumbling out now. "A luxury resort developer. They offered a fortune for this land. Enough to solve all my problems and then some. I had it all lined up." He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate shame. "I even had an appraiser come out here last month. I told Mom he was an insurance inspector. I lied to her face in her own home." The confession hung in the air, ugly and raw. His in-laws stared at him aghast. Tiffany looked like he had slapped her. He had not only been a terrible son, he had been a con man, and he had dragged them all into his scheme. It was at that precise, dramatically perfect moment that a pair of headlights cut through the darkness at the end of the driveway. A familiar old pickup truck rumbled towards the house, towing a horse trailer. It was Hank. He pulled up, killed the engine, and hopped out, tipping his hat to the stunned group on the porch. "Evenin', folks," he said, his voice calm and steady. He walked to the back of the trailer and unlatched the door. Out trotted Maverick, followed by Starlight and Duke. "My horses." Looking clean, calm, and well-fed. Kevin stared, his mouth agape. "But if they're in there, then who?" Hank leaned against the side of his truck. "Oh," he said casually. "The horses that have been keeping you company all weekend? Those would be the Johnsons' new ponies. They're a bit mischievous. Evelyn agreed to house-sit them for a couple of days. Said it was part of some newfangled animal behavioral study they were doing. Didn't she mention it?" The collective look of dawning horror on their faces was a sight to behold. They had been terrorized not by wild ranch animals, but by a couple of naughty ponies. Hank wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small remote control. "She also asked me to give you this," he said, tossing it to Kevin. "Said the power is connected to a remote system she controls from her phone. But she figured you all might have had enough of the dark by now." He pressed a button. With a hum, the lights in the house flickered on. The air conditioning unit whirred to life. He saved the best for last. "Oh, and that whole story about me and Dale being in Wyoming? We've been at the fishing cabin just down the river. Evelyn had us on standby, just in case of a real emergency." He gave them a slow, knowing smile. "Seems like you all had things well in hand." He tipped his hat again. "Y'all have a good night now." He climbed back into his truck and drove away, leaving my 3 beautiful horses grazing peacefully on the lawn and my 10 guests sitting in the sudden, bright glare of the porch light. They were left alone in the silence, with nothing but the truth of their own greed, the low hum of the air conditioner, and the ridiculous, silent silhouette of the mechanical bull as their companions. The game was over, and I had won. I drove up the next morning. I had timed my arrival perfectly with the sunrise, the golden light spilling over the mountains and illuminating my valley. I'd had a wonderful night's sleep, a deep and satisfying rest. I felt powerful. I felt free. I parked my clean car next to their mud-splattered SUVs. They were all on the porch looking like a group of castaways, blinking in the morning sun. They watched me get out of the car, silent and wary, as if I were a ghost. I was wearing a crisp pair of jeans, Richard's favorite flannel shirt, and a look of serene calm. "Good morning," I said cheerfully, my voice echoing in the quiet air. "Did you all sleep well?" No one answered. I walked past them up the steps and into my house. The air was stale and smelled of defeat. I went straight to the kitchen. took out the bag of my best coffee beans from its hiding place in the attic, and started a pot. The rich, wonderful aroma began to fill the house, a scent of civilization and order returning. Kevin followed me in, looking like a hollowed-out version of himself. "Mom," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, dear," I said, not looking at him as I took a mug from the cupboard. You planned all of this." It wasn't a question. I finally turned to face him, leaning back against the counter. "No, Kevin," I said calmly. "You planned this. You planned to invade my home, to disrespect my life, to kick me out of my own bed. You planned to manipulate me into selling the one thing your father and I built together. I just facilitated the authentic experience you were so eager to provide for your guests." I walked over to the kitchen table and set down a thick manila folder I'd brought with me. I opened it and spread the contents across the table. There were screenshots of Tiffany's Instagram posts, printouts of text messages between the cousins mocking my rustic lifestyle, and the crown jewel, a signed affidavit from the appraiser you sent. "How did you know?" Kevin breathed, staring at the papers. "The world is a very small place, honey," I said. "The appraiser you hired? His wife is Carol's second cousin." He felt terribly guilty about lying to a nice old widow. He was more than happy to provide a statement about the man who hired him to assess a property for a potential inheritance sale. That's an interesting term, isn't it? Inheritance. As if I were already gone. I slid another document across the table. "And this is the most important paper you'll see today. This is the deed to the ranch. As you can see, 2 months ago, I had it legally transferred into a permanent conservation trust." I let that sink in. I watched the color drain from his face. Tiffany and her parents, who had crept into the kitchen, stared at the document in horror. "The ranch will be protected forever," I continued, my voice even and strong. "It can never be subdivided or developed. When I pass, the trust will be managed by a board. And the Johnsons have been given lifetime rights to serve as its caretakers. They actually love this land, you see. They respect it." You disinherited me," Kevin stammered. I gave a small, sad shake of my head. "Don't be so dramatic, Kevin. I didn't take anything from you that was ever yours. The land, the house. This was mine, your father's dream. Your inheritance from him wasn't property. It was his name, his integrity, his capacity for love and hard work. That was your inheritance. And you squandered it. You sold it cheap for a chance to impress these people." I gestured to his in-laws, who had the decency to look ashamed. I stood up straight, feeling taller than I had in years. "This is my home," I said, my voice ringing with a finality that left no room for argument. "And you are no longer welcome in it." The finality in my voice hung in the air like a guillotine. There were no more arguments, no more excuses. Just the cold, hard truth laid bare on my kitchen table. "Now," I said, my voice softening just a fraction but still firm as granite, "before you go, you will clean up the mess you made. All of you." For the next 3 hours, I sat on my porch in Richard's old rocking chair, sipping my excellent coffee and supervised. I watched 10 of the most entitled people I had ever met scrub floors, clean toilets, and scrape dried horse manure off the porch. Tiffany, on her hands and knees in her ruined linen jumpsuit, scrubbing a stain from the floor, was a particularly satisfying sight. There was no complaining. There was only the sound of sponges and the heavy, thick silence of shame. When they were finally done, the house wasn't perfect, but it was habitable again. Hank arrived with a tow truck to haul away the Mercedes, which had a mysterious set of hoof prints on the hood. The other cars were deemed drivable, though significantly dirtier. As they were packing their cars, a humbled and haggard convoy ready to retreat, Kevin approached me one last time. He stood before me, his eyes red-rimmed, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a little boy again. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry. For everything. Is there any way? Can I ever fix this?" I looked at my son, the man he had become, and the boy he once was. I thought of Richard, and the promise I had made to him. "You want a second chance?" I said quietly. "Then you earn it. Not with words. Not with apologies. With actions. Your father spent the last 2 years of his life, weak and in pain, building this place with his own 2 hands because it was his heart's desire. You couldn't last one weekend here without falling apart. When you can show me, not tell me, that you understand what commitment and sacrifice and love really mean. When you can build something for someone other than yourself, then you can call me." He nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "How will I know when that is?" "You'll know," I said. "And so will I." He gave me a brief, awkward hug. It was the first time he had willingly touched me in years. Then he turned and got into his car. The convoy of shame pulled down my driveway and disappeared onto the main road. Mariana never looked back. I stood on the porch for a long time, breathing in the clean Montana air. I walked over to Maverick, who was grazing peacefully by the fence, and stroked his strong neck. He nickered softly, nudging my hand. That evening I sat in my rocking chair, a glass of Richard's favorite whiskey in my hand, and watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. The ranch was quiet. My home was my own again. The battle was over. I had defended our dream. I had honored my husband, and in the process I had reclaimed myself. I raised my glass to the sky. "We did it, Richard," I whispered. "We did it." Thank you all for listening to my story. It's not easy to stand up for yourself, especially against your own family. But sometimes you have to protect the things that matter most. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand with someone you love? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. It helps to know we're not alone. And if my story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more. You never know what a retired nurse from Montana will get up to next.